What would you do if the child you raised turned around and took everything from you? This is the story of Harold Bennett, a blind father who gave his adopted son a home, a name, and unconditional love. But when betrayal knocks in the form of forged signatures and a changed lock, Harold must confront not only the son he thought he knew, but the quiet strength he forgot he had. What unfolds is not revenge, but redemption. Stay with us as we uncover how a man left with nothing builds something far greater, one act of grace at a time. He raised the boy like his own flesh and blood, gave him everything, and in return the boy threw him out like yesterday's trash. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low and confused, unsure whether to warm your skin or disappear altogether. On the porch of a modest home in Jackson, Mississippi, stood Mr. Harold Bennett, an older man in his 70s, blind since his early 40s. His white cane rested against the railing. He wore house slippers and carried a canvas tote with a warm rotisserie chicken, canned beans, and a loaf of white bread. He tilted his head toward the front door, the house he'd owned for 22 years, and something didn't feel right. The key didn't turn. Not with a gentle twist, not with a firm shove. He tried again. No give. The lock had been changed. Harold knocked, softly at first, then louder. The plastic bag crinkled in his hand. He wore his favorite navy cardigan, faintly scented with cedar and lavender, his late wife's favorite. He waited. Then the door cracked open. A voice, light female, spoke through the gap. "Oh? Hi, Mr. Bennett. You're not supposed to be back yet." It was Natalie, Ryan's girlfriend. Harold lifted his chin slightly. "Not back yet. This is my house." There was hesitation. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "I think Ryan was going to explain. You're not living here anymore." Silence fell heavy and hard. Harold tightened his grip on the tote. His hands, once strong enough to carry patience and fight fires in his younger days, trembled. "Come again?" Natalie's voice turned syrupy, the kind people use when masking discomfort. "It's just paperwork. Ryan said you signed over the deed weeks ago." The air turned colder. Harold remembered the documents, pages spread across the kitchen table. Ryan had told him they were just to get things in order in case anything happened. He said it would protect the house. He had trusted his son. Natalie said something about calling Ryan and went back inside. The lock clicked behind her. Harold didn't knock again. He stood still for what felt like forever. Then, cane in one hand, chicken in the other, he stepped carefully down the porch steps and began to walk. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he wasn't welcome back. And what Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Harold had hidden something too, something far more valuable than a mortgage. Long before this betrayal, long before Natalie or signatures, Harold Bennett had been more than a man with a house. He had been a father. And not just to any child, to a boy no one else wanted. It was 1996. Harold was a night nurse at St. Dominic Hospital in Jackson. He had gone blind years earlier due to a degenerative eye disease but refused to let it define him. With sharp instincts, steady hands, and a soul of iron, he worked the graveyard shift, tending to patients, cracking jokes, offering calm in chaos. Harold had long given up on having children after losing his wife and going through years of silent grief. Then one night a toddler came in, bruised, pale, barely 2 years old, with a broken wrist and a too-big T-shirt stained with mustard. The boy's foster mother dropped him off and vanished. Harold didn't plan to adopt. But sometimes life doesn't ask. It hands you a child and dares you to walk away. The boy, Ryan, was silent for days, clung to Harold's shirt like ivy, wouldn't eat unless Harold fed him. He didn't cry, he just waited for someone to stay. 2 months later, Harold began the adoption process. By the time Christmas came, Ryan had his last name. People questioned him. A blind black man adopting a troubled white child? They scoffed. He didn't care. "I can't fix the whole world," he'd say, "but I can start with one boy." And he gave that boy a life full of quiet, unwavering love. A room shaped like a racetrack, bedtime stories, a Braille-labeled lunchbox, piano lessons, trips to the zoo. When Ryan was diagnosed with asthma, Harold found the best pediatrician. When reading became a struggle, he found a tutor. He even taught Ryan how to braid hair using action figures. Because someday you might have a daughter, and she'll need a dad who knows. Harold made Ryan write thank you notes after every holiday. He never missed a parent-teacher meeting. But love can't always shield from questions. When Ryan hit high school, he started pulling away. "Where do I look different?" he'd ask. "Why will people stare at us? Am I even yours?" Harold would answer with the same truth every time. "You're mine. You may not look like me, but you belong to me." Still, the gap grew. By college, Ryan barely visited, just the occasional overnight, a rushed dinner, a distracted hug with one hand on his phone. Harold never complained. He kept Ryan's room exactly the same, kept the porch light on. He believed love, real love, didn't need reminders. Until today. Until the lock changed. And what Ryan didn't know, what Natalie couldn't see, was that Harold Bennett wasn't just a blind old man. He was the sole trustee of a secret inheritance left behind by his late brother, a reclusive oil geologist who struck big in West Texas. $9.5 million, placed in a private trust, waiting for the right time. And Ryan had just walked away from all of it. Harold adjusted the tote bag, cane tapping steadily as he made his way down the block. The sun, now shining a little more boldly, lit his path. He wasn't broken. He wasn't finished. He was just remembering who he was before they forgot. After Harold's wife passed, something shifted in Ryan. Suddenly, he started showing up more often. At first it felt like love. He helped Harold clean the gutters, mow the lawn, and reminded him to take his blood pressure medication on schedule. Some weekends he'd bring Natalie, and they'd sit on the porch while Harold grilled cornbread and listened to reruns of Jeopardy on the old radio. Harold thought things were turning a corner. Maybe the distance had softened, maybe grief brought them back together. But Ryan hadn't returned to rebuild. He had come to take inventory, and by the time Harold sensed something was wrong, it was too late. His name had been quietly removed from property records, and the trust he had built with years of love and sacrifice had been sold off, cheaply. But Harold hadn't forgotten who he was. That night he sat in his car, parked 2 blocks from what used to be his home. It was across from a weather-beaten row of duplexes with peeling paint and lawn chairs stacked on porches. He didn't cry, not once. But his hand stayed at 10 and 2 on the wheel for a long time, even after the engine was off. The cold rotisserie chicken lay untouched in the passenger seat, grease bleeding through the bag. He stared blankly ahead, unable to see, but seeing everything. Grief doesn't just steal your breath. It makes you question whether you were ever really seen by the people you gave everything to. When Leonard died 3 years ago, her husband of 29 years, it had been sudden, a misdiagnosed blood clot. The hospital called it a complication. But Harold had been a nurse too long to accept that. He filed complaints, gathered evidence, called in an old attorney friend, and 2 years later won a malpractice settlement no one expected. $9.5 million. He didn't tell anyone, not even Ryan. He split the money into multiple private trusts under his late daughter's name. It wasn't paranoia, it was peace of mind. Because Harold knew what money could do to people. He'd seen it change hearts. So he kept it quiet, sacred. Let money be the silent friend, not the noisy master. Sitting in the bank lobby the next morning, Harold, his ankles swollen from sleeplessness, heart aching, realized something sharper than betrayal. Ryan hadn't just taken the house. He had underestimated him. He might have lost a roof, but not his mind, and not his resources. So Harold checked into a quiet roadside motel in Meridian, paid cash, no questions asked. He needed time, not just for revenge, but to remember who he really was. He flipped through the small notebook he carried, filled with prayers, phone numbers, and a faded note scribbled the day his lawsuit was settled. Don't let money talk loud. Let it buy you time. Let it buy you silence. Harold smiled. Ryan thought he had taken control. He had no idea he'd just set his father free. But freedom rarely comes with comfort. Not yet. Harold still had to walk through fire before he rose from it. He remembered the first time Ryan brought him those documents. It was a Sunday. Harold was at the kitchen table, folding napkins while the oven baked a sweet potato pie. He knew it would rain. His knees had been throbbing all morning. Ryan showed up unannounced, which Harold never liked, but he told himself maybe the boy missed him. Maybe. Ryan walked in wearing a designer shirt that looked like it belonged to someone trying too hard. Natalie trailed behind him, glued to her phone. "Hey, Pop," Ryan said, kissing the top of Harold's head. "We brought some papers, nothing big, just tax stuff, cleaning things up a bit." Harold raised an eyebrow. "What kind of papers?" Ryan whipped out a file like a magician with a trick. Inside, property transfers, real estate authorizations, power of attorney forms. Natalie, still scrolling, mumbled, "It's just a way to protect your estate, Mr. Bennett. Very standard." "I'm not looking to avoid anything," Harold replied, softly but clearly. Ryan chuckled. "We know. That's why we're helping you. Look, if anything happens, Lord forbid, we need to make sure everything stays in the family." Harold tried to read the pages, but the words floated and slipped. His reading glasses pinched the bridge of his nose, so he rarely wore them. Ryan noticed. "Here," he said, placing a pen in Harold's hand. "I marked where to sign. You don't have to worry about the rest." He wanted to say something. Maybe I should get someone to look this over, or why do you need full power of attorney now? But he didn't, because in that moment, he remembered his son as a toddler. The boy who once wouldn't sleep without holding his hand. The boy who got chicken pox and cried through the night curled in his arms. So Harold signed, one page at a time. Ryan laughed. "You're making history, Pop." Harold smiled faintly. The pie timer went off. He got up, turned off the oven. That moment would haunt him in the weeks that followed. The smell of cinnamon and scorched crust, the final snap of the pen's cap, the slight smirk on Natalie's face. That was the last time he ever sat at that kitchen table. The visits got shorter after that. Ryan started showing up with bank statements and pushy investment friends, always talking about real estate, about assets, about his house as if it were already liquidated. He even started calling Harold by his first name, Harold, in front of Natalie. That was new. One day, while watering the peony bush in the front yard, Harold overheard Natalie whisper, "Once we buy this place, we can finally rent that loft in Dallas." That night, Harold packed a small bag, his Bible, his passport, the last photo of Leonard, and a bank notebook from the lawsuit, one Ryan never knew about. Harold's body wasn't as fast as it once was. But his mind? Still sharp enough to know when love had gone cold. He wasn't going to stand by and watch his legacy sold off like a yard sale. Ryan had forgotten something important, whose name was still on the final line. The day Ryan called him a guest in his own house was a Wednesday. After lunch, Harold had just vacuumed the living room, something he still insisted on doing himself, even if his granddaughter teased him for it. "Dust doesn't care about your age," he'd always say, "and I like my house clean for the Lord." Ryan strolled in with sunglasses and wireless headphones around his neck. Natalie was behind him, mid-call on her Bluetooth. They didn't greet him, just walked past like he was a tenant. Then Ryan stopped, looked over his shoulder, and said, "Hey, next time you use the Dyson, could you dump the bin? We've got guests coming to tour the place this weekend." Harold's head tilted. "Tour the place?" Ryan grinned. "Just agents checking out market value, Pop, research." And in that moment, Harold knew. He wasn't just a father who'd been forgotten. He was a blind man, they thought, couldn't see a thing. "It's just thinking ahead," Ryan said casually, standing in the living room like it already belonged to him. "We have to explore our options, right?" Harold stood straighter. "What options?" he asked calmly. That's when Ryan said it. "Well, now that my dad's more of a guest, you know, legally speaking." Harold's fingers curled tightly around the vacuum handle. He didn't shout, didn't cry, just gave a small, quiet nod. That night he packed his small bag. Not much, only what mattered. His Bible. A worn notebook, 2 clean shirts, a pair of sneakers, and Leonard's wedding band tucked in a side pouch of his old shaving kit. He hadn't worn it since Leonard's death, but never let it leave his bedside. Ryan didn't ask where he was going. Natalie didn't care. They thought they had what they came for. Harold rented a room in a roadside motel near the gas station where the lights always flickered and diesel trucks rumbled through the night. The bed creaked when he sat. The heater wheezed like an old man out of breath. But the space was quiet. It was his. He sat at the small corner desk, opened his notebook. 14 years ago, he had jotted down a number for a woman named Doris, a housing advocate who once helped him when a tenant filed a bogus complaint at his rental property. He dialed. 2 rings. Then silence. Disconnected. He sighed, then remembered C.J. Clarence C.J. Bell. Leonard's oldest friend, a retired attorney with a cane, a sharp tongue, and a moral compass that didn't waver. Harold hadn't spoken to him in years, but something deep told him. Call. 6 rings. Then a raspy voice answered, "Better be Jesus or trouble." Harold smiled. "Maybe both." "Harold Bennett? I'll be. It's been a while. I need to talk to you." CJ didn't need convincing. Old friends remember Stu after surgery, silent hospital visits, and midnight prayers over losses no one else understood. They met the next morning at a roadside diner off I-20, where waitresses still called everyone honey, whether you were 5 or 85. CJ looked older, with silver in his beard and less sparkle in his eyes, but his presence hadn't dulled. Still carried weight, still listened like every word mattered. "Lord, you look like trouble wrapped in flannel," he joked as he slid into the booth. Harold chuckled softly. "Good morning." EJ sipped his coffee, black, bitter, and no nonsense, just like Leonard used to. Then he leaned in. "Okay," he said. "Start from the top. Don't hold back. Tell me everything." So Harold did. The signatures, the deception, the changed locks, the cold glances, the fake warmth. CJ listened, didn't interrupt once. When Harold finished, CJ leaned back and exhaled. "You made one mistake." "What's that?" Harold asked. "Kent. Forgot who raised him." Harold stared at the napkin in front of him. "But I signed the documents." "Yeah, but you signed under false pretenses. If he misrepresented what you were signing, if you didn't fully understand, it's not binding. Not in court. Do you think we can fight it?" CJ cracked a grin. "Bennett, I could take this boy to court in my sleep." Harold let out a half laugh. "Tired. Not bitter, just worn. I'm not trying to destroy him, CJ. I want my home. I want to look in the mirror and not feel like a fool." EJ nodded. "Then we won't destroy him. We'll teach him." For the next 2 hours, they dissected every detail. Dates, documents, conversations. Harold, ever the meticulous nurse, had written most of it down before he even knew he'd need it. Record everything, it was second nature. CJ laid out the plan, which attorney he'd connect him with, how they'd open an inquiry into the transfer's legitimacy, how they'd challenge it if it moved to court. Then Harold said something he hadn't told a soul. "I have money, CJ." CJ raised an eyebrow. "Like savings?" "No," Harold said quietly. "Real money. Settlement money. $9.5 million from the hospital after Leonard died." CJ blinked, nearly dropped his coffee. "You've been sitting on $9 million and let that boy do all this?" Harold lowered his voice. "I didn't want the money to change how I loved him. I didn't want him to change because of it." CJ didn't speak right away, just stared at him, then reached across the table and placed a hand over Harold's. It didn't, he said gently. He changed all on his own. Harold turned to the window where trucks roared past the highway. In the glass he saw his reflection. Older than he felt, frayed but not broken. He turned back. I want to do this the right way. No drama, no spotlight. I just want my name back on that front door. CJ nodded firmly. We'll get it done. But before lawyers and courtrooms, Harold knew there was one last thing he had to do. One last conversation. Not with the man Ryan had become, but with the boy Harold once carried through hospital halls. And this time, he wasn't calling ahead. Harold knew that if he called ahead, Ryan would either let it ring or pass the phone to Natalie. So he didn't call. He just showed up. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything look deceptively peaceful. The front yard looked pristine, trimmed bushes, polished hedges, just enough to impress, not enough to care. The begonia tree he planted with Leonard was gone, dug out. Harold knocked once. Ryan opened the door wearing gym shorts and a designer hoodie, holding a protein shake. His face froze when he saw who was there. Dad, Harold, what are you doing here? Harold stepped forward slowly, his white cane tapping the concrete softly, stopping just behind the mesh screen door. I won't take much of your time. I'm just here to say one thing. Brian looked over his shoulder, probably checking if Natalie was around. Then he stepped onto the porch. Look, if this is about the house. Harold raised a hand. Let me finish. Brian fell quiet. I raised you when no one else would. Not because I had to, not because I wanted thanks. I did it because I saw a little boy who needed to be loved, and I gave you everything I had. Brian's expression tightened, but he didn't speak. I gave up sleep, vacations, years of my life. I gave you my name, and never, not once, did I make you feel like a guest. Harold's voice cracked slightly, but he held firm. And in return, you handed me a new lock and a signature I never saw coming. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. You signed it, Dad. I didn't force you. Then don't call me Dad if you don't mean it. Silence. Harold straightened his shoulders. I'm not here to argue. Just to tell you I know what you did. And you should know. I'm not broke. Never was. Ryan's face twitched, first disbelief, then worry, then shame. I have enough to buy this house 10 times over. I didn't know, Ryan whispered. You weren't supposed to? Harold replied. Because love isn't a transaction. Loyalty can't be bought. But now you know. And so do I. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Things will go where they need to go. I just wanted to look you in the eye, one last time, before that happens. Ryan lowered his head. Are you going to sue me? No, Harold said quietly. I'm going to remind you how much a home really costs. He turned and walked to his car. No shouting, no begging, just a man who had remembered his worth. Because lawsuits don't scare men like Harold. What scares people like Ryan is watching the person they underestimated become stronger than they ever imagined. 3 months later, the house was empty. No Ryan, no Natalie. The furniture was gone. A retired schoolteacher from Lafayette bought the place. She told her sister the house felt heavy when she walked in, and it had. CJ moved fast. The lawsuit for fraud was approved by the court quicker than anyone expected. The judge didn't blink reviewing the documents or the testimony. It was clear Harold had been deceived, signatures manipulated, circumstances suspicious. Ryan didn't show up to the hearing. He had already left the state. Natalie moved back to Dallas alone. Harold didn't celebrate, didn't smile. He simply exhaled. Long. Deep, like something inside had been holding its breath and could finally let go. But he never moved back. That house had too many ghosts, too many Sunday dinners that felt like rehearsals for abandonment. Instead, Harold used his untouched inheritance to do something no one expected. He bought 3 modest homes in Pascagoula, Mississippi, not fancy, just enough. He turned them into safe housing for elderly men who had been displaced, forgotten, or cast aside. He named the initiative Lenny's Porch after Leonard, the man who always said he wanted to retire and do something that mattered. The first resident was Raymond, 74, kicked out by his son when he stopped paying for daycare. The second was Hector, whose daughter sold the house while he recovered from a stroke. Harold cooked Sunday meals. Sometimes they listened to jazz, sometimes they told stories about people who hurt them and the ones they outlived. He didn't need to explain his past. The way he walked said enough. Steady, calm, without bitterness. DJ still stopped by, especially when paperwork piled up. He once joked, "We should put your face on a billboard, the man who turned betrayal into a blueprint." Harold only smiled. "I just did what Leonard taught me. You don't fold when cornered. You stand, you pray, and you protect your peace." But Harold knew the fight had never been about the house. It was never about what Ryan took. It was about reclaiming the dignity no one could give or take from him. 1 year later, Harold sat on the back porch of Lenny's Porch with a warm cup of tea and a fleece blanket over his lap. The sunset above Pascagoula blazed orange and gold. Raymond was upstairs tuning a guitar. Hector mumbled in the kitchen while chopping greens. And Harold, for the first time in years, felt still. Not busy, not bruised, just whole. That morning he received a letter, no return address, just his name written in handwriting he hadn't seen in almost a year. Inside was a torn notepad. "I ruined everything. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I was owed something. Maybe I never understood what you gave me. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted to say it. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope you're okay. Ryan." Harold read it twice, then folded it gently and placed it in the back of his Bible. Not to forget, but because some things should be remembered, without being reopened. He never wrote back. He didn't need to. Forgiveness, to Harold, wasn't about Ryan. It was about freeing himself from the grip of betrayal. He now knew something he hadn't before. You can love someone fully, raise them right, give them everything, and still lose them. Not because of who you were, but because of who they chose to be. And there is no shame in that. As the evening crickets began their hymn, Harold leaned back in his chair. He took a breath. Not just of air, but of memory, of grace, of meaning. Because a house is not just a roof. It's the people underneath it. And Harold had built a new one. No signatures needed. Harold remained on that porch long after the sky dimmed and the stars came out one by one, hanging quietly over the southern Mississippi horizon. The warmth of the fleece across his lap was comforting, but the deeper warmth came from something else. Something built slowly, layer by layer, in the aftermath of a storm he never saw coming. In the silence, he could hear the soft creak of floorboards upstairs, the hum of the kitchen radio, the muted laughter of Raymond reminiscing about his Navy days. This wasn't the kind of house that appeared in glossy magazines. It was more sacred than that. It was built on hard-earned peace, the kind that costs everything and asks even more. But here, finally, Harold could breathe. What do we do with pain? That question lingered like a low wind in the trees. It's what all stories eventually return to. Do we bury it, drink it away, feed it until it turns bitter and mean, or do we compost it, let it decay, break down and nourish something better? Harold chose the latter. He knew now that pain, like love, demands to be used. You either let it destroy you or you find a way to build something with it, and in that choice is the deepest kind of power. The lessons we miss when we rush past the hurt. So many people think betrayal is the end of the road, that a broken relationship marks the full stop in the story. But the truth is more complicated. Betrayal isn't the end. Sometimes it's the door to a different beginning, the kind you never expected but may have always needed. Ryan's betrayal didn't erase the love Harold had poured into his childhood. It didn't invalidate the sacrifices, the midnight feedings, the piano lessons, or the quiet forgiveness that ran through every year of parenting. What it did do was force Harold to confront one of life's harder truths, that we can raise someone with everything we have and still lose them. Not through death, not through distance, but through their own decisions, their own way of measuring worth and loyalty. The world doesn't talk about that enough. We hear so many stories about parents abandoning children, but rarely do we speak of children abandoning the values their parents bled to give them. Yet Harold didn't grow bitter. He let grief come, let it speak, and then he did something powerful. He reclaimed his own narrative. Dignity is not a gift, it's a discipline. Dignity isn't something people hand you. It's something you guard, polish, and uphold, especially when others try to chip away at it. When Harold walked away from that house, when he packed his things into a single canvas bag and didn't look back, he wasn't defeated. He was rising. He reminded us all that you can walk away with nothing and still carry everything that matters. It's not the size of your bank account. It's not the name on the deed. It's not even the verdict in court. It's the way you hold your head, the way you look someone in the eye and say, "I know who I am," even if you forgot. That kind of quiet dignity doesn't come with titles. It comes with scars, and Harold had earned every one of his. The kind of strength that doesn't scream. In today's world, strength is often confused with volume. Who talks loudest? Who claps back hardest? Who draws the most attention when wronged? But Harold taught us something else. Real strength whispers. It breathes before it reacts. It prays instead of punishes. It builds again when no one is watching. He didn't curse Ryan. He didn't shame him on social media. He didn't stage a takedown. He simply told the truth, then walked away and built something better. And that is power. Not the kind that controls, the kind that liberates. The true cost of a home. Most people think a house is bought with money, but anyone who's built a family knows better. A home is paid for in sleepless nights, scraped knees, birthday cakes, and forgiveness extended when it's least deserved. It's paid for in "I love you" texts that never get answered, in rides to school, in holding someone's hand when the fever won't break. That was the mortgage Harold paid every day for decades. And when Ryan sold that house behind his back, he didn't just betray Harold's name, he betrayed the value of every quiet act of love that had made those walls sacred. But even so, Harold didn't try to win the house back with rage. He honored it with justice, then walked away with the understanding that a house is just wood and nails, without love inside. Giving without regret. The world often warns us not to give too much, not to love too hard, not to care too deeply. But Harold did all those things, and even after being burned, after being locked out by the very boy he raised, he said something most wouldn't. "I don't regret it." Because giving someone love they didn't know how to return doesn't make you foolish. It makes you brave. It means you lived your values, not just when they were easy, but when they were costly. And that in itself is a life well lived. What healing looks like. Healing doesn't always look like closure. Sometimes it looks like cooking for people who won't betray you, sitting on a porch with men who understand loss, waking up in a place where your name is still spoken with respect. Harold didn't heal by confronting Ryan again. He healed by creating Lenny's porch, a place where older men just like him could find a second chance at dignity, a soft place to land after being discarded by a world too quick to forget its elders. That is redemption in action, not through revenge, but through restoration. Faith quietly kept. Though he never shouted it, Harold's strength came from something deeper, his faith. Not the performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up when no one's watching. He prayed when Ryan was born, he prayed when Leonard died, and he prayed when he walked away from the only home he ever owned. Faith doesn't always answer us with miracles, but sometimes it gives us just enough light to take the next step. And step by step Harold walked his way into peace. Forgiveness is not a gift to the offender. In the end, when Harold received Ryan's letter, he didn't reply. Not because he was cold, but because he didn't have to. Forgiveness wasn't about Ryan. It was about Harold's freedom. He folded that letter and tucked it behind his Bible, not to forget, but to remember without reopening the wound. Because forgiveness in its purest form is a boundary. It says, "What you did hurt me, but it will not define me." The legacy we leave. When Harold dies someday, and we all will, his legacy won't be that he once lost a house. It will be that he built a home when no one else would, twice. Once for a boy who didn't know how to stay, and once for strangers who became family. He didn't need monuments, just faith, a porch, and a heart that refused to close even after it was broken. The final lesson. Love fully anyway. If there is one truth to carry from Harold's story, let it be this. You can give your heart to someone, and they might still leave. You can pour your life into someone, and they might still betray you. But that does not mean you were wrong to love, because in the end, your love does not say anything about who they were. It says everything about who you are, and that is enough.